Are millennials killing name brands? Generation Z is already moving away from Facebook, and 8 more industries could be next. You've probably heard a headline like that before. However, what is the concept of generations really all about? What's after Generation Z? And why do these generations even exist? First, let's get the what's after Z conundrum out of the way. Unless the new name gets very popular sometime soon, Generation Alpha shall be the name. Mark McCrindle is the person that is leading the campaign to call them that. Generation Alpha will hopefully be a new beginning, and we'll dig deeper into that topic later in the video. Unless more popular names arise, we'll continue with the Greek alphabet. In that case, the generation afterwards would be Generation Beta. But there is a good chance a more popular name will arise. Generation Y tried to be the name for the generation that came after Generation X, but although that name is used periodically, Millennials is more popular. Now that you have that out of the way, let's rewind. Who really started this generation thing? Historians generally agree that the name of generations for economic and social purposes started in the 20th century. Of course, people complained about the older people being behind the times and the younger ones being young and dumb and naive forever. However, properly named generations being a serious concept wasn't really a thing until the 20th century. In addition, to make things clear, I'm speaking from a primarily American/Western perspective because the concept of generations can differ in different parts of the world. This whole generations thing became serious when generational theorists Neil Howe and William Strauss published Generations, the History of America's Future. They proposed a system. This system would have saeculums. Saeculums are like eras in human history, but only about a century long each. Each saeculum would have turnings, and the turnings are pretty much the same as generations. A new turning starts when the previous turning is entering adulthood, so each turning is about a quarter of a century long. I could make things more complex, but I'm not going to. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to call them generations, okay? Anyways, the first generation in a saeculum would be the high, the second the awakening, the third the unraveling, and the fourth the crisis. These are different types of generations, and this is all essentially a pattern for society. Every century, there would be these 4 turnings in that order that represent the shifts in society, just like seasons, as Strauss and Howe said. In a 4-season climate, each season is practically always about a few months long. However, a season is a little longer or shorter in spite of what it says on the calendar. Sometimes a season is more severe one year than it is the other. It's the pattern that matters, and the pattern is always there. Anyways, let's look at these seasons, but for generations. The high is where all the institutions like governments are strong, and individualism is weak. Society is confident about where it wants to go collectively, although those outside the majority often still feel stifled by the conformity. The awakening is when people awaken and realize maybe institutions suck, and it's time to take back independence. The unraveling is when institutions are weakened and individualism is soaring as people enjoy their newfound freedom. The crisis is an era of destruction, often involving war or revolution, in which institutional life is destroyed and rebuilt in response to a perceived threat to the nation's survival. After the crisis, civic authority revives, and people begin to identify themselves as members of a larger group. When it comes to the precise year boundaries of generations, things get a bit interesting. The start and end dates for them often differ from source to source. For this video, we're going to use the most accepted ones that fit together well. Let's take a look at the generations in the last 2 saeculums, starting with the missionary generation. Post-Civil War, this one was the high, things were well, but that didn't mean these people didn't protest against institutions. Fun fact, Albert Einstein was part of this generation. Then came the lost generation. Afterwards came the greatest generation. They grew up during the rapid technological innovation of the radio and telephone, and many of them ended up fighting in World War I. Then came the silent generation, who had to suffer through the Great Depression and World War II. Then things get interesting with the baby boomers, born from 1946 to 1964. This generation is the new high. Life is great and people were wealthy and optimistic. However, That wealth would cause resentment towards them from the future millennials. Anyways, they decided to have lots of kids. Marketers decided that this generation of people needed a name because as long as they were alive, they would have a massive influence on the market and the world as a whole. Communities expanded a lot. Lots of schools were built when baby boomers were school age. When baby boomers started buying cars, guess what? Cars started selling more. Now, baby boomers are retiring, so products and services meant for seniors are selling more. The baby boom really did have a ripple effect. Then Generation X came along. They were an awakening generation. But when they were children, most of the attention was on adults. They went through their formative years as one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in US history. A lot of them were latchkey kids, especially ones in richer families. A latchkey kid is one who returns from school to a home with absent parents, due to them being at work. This may have been a result of increased divorce rates and increased dual income families at a time before childcare options outside the home were widely available. Nonetheless, life went on. Then the avocado toast eating millennials came along. They were an unraveling generation. There's so much to talk about millennials that if I continue on with millennials, this video will just be a lecture about millennials. Then we come to today's generation, Generation Z, a crisis generation. Members of Generation Z tend to be very comfortable with technology and social media. However, contrary to what some may assume, this does not always translate to digital literacy. They're also growing up in a world with an uncertain future due to climate change and shifting politics. However, a lot of them are speaking out, concerned about this. Although things may be hectic right now, we can note that after a crisis generation comes a new high. We can only hope that eventually the dust will settle, the world will be back on track, and we'll see a new generation, Generation Alpha, grow up. Generations are cool and all, but why do they exist? Is it just so that there are names for age groups that people can refer to and ranting about how all the young people are up to no good? Well, no. There are more important purposes than that. Having names for age groups really helps when you're talking about them in, say, marketing, for example. But you know what the problem with generations is? They generalize so much. A 20-year age group is full of such a variety of people, and there are little similarities between them. Sometimes we only see fruitful results when we get more specific. And more specific did we get? We have things like Generation K, a lesser known and smaller generation that consists of the older people in Generation Z and the youngest ones from the Millennials. Generations are just kind of stupid sometimes, at least on their own without any additional context or specifics, like middle class Americans millennials instead of just millennials. Anyways, if you found this video useful, drop a like, and if you want to see more videos like this one, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.